presentation here today. Paul, what has struck me is how respectful you appear to be to the institutions. This whole inquiry is because of fundamental failures. Would you agree with that? That's the reason of this inquiry?
Well, as I said earlier, I'm not an advocate for either the institutions, the victims and survivors, or even the Northern Ireland Executive. I'm trying to get some kind of like what strikes me. I mean, the gambit of the inquiry was from 1922, from the formation of the Northern Ireland State, right up to 1995. So, like, shockingly, like, it's 30 years on since the last case really, crystallised. Like, it's amazing just the passage of time. No, I mean, I at the start of the process, I just embedded myself in all the kind of evidence that Justice Hart and the inquiry. I come back to this point, really, that, ultimately the state was responsible within the institutions. Anything from a hostile environment right through to, the most horrendous examples of abuse took place. But, if there was light touch regulatory regimes, very infrequent inspections, arguably, quite low levels of state intervention. So Justice Hart was trying to be fairly all that sort of context. So that's why I've kind of remained very neutral in all of this. I am struck by the fact that the people who are now taking this forward largely weren't people that were directly involved. As I say, it's 30 years since the last case, if you like, crystallised. And so the people who are now, if you like, leading on behalf of the institutions are genuinely, I use the term honourable, they're generally trying to do the right thing now, really, for the process. And yes, they have a fiduciary responsibility towards their own organisation as well.
You can see it from our point of view, where we're tasked as a committee to look at this issue, and there's a number of the institutions won't even come and appear before us, which gives me the impression that they're not facing up to their responsibilities. Yes, you've engaged with them, but they're basically, stonewalling this committee. That's something that concerns me. It concerns me how soft, it's a softly approach it appears you're taking. Do you know how many people have died between the publication of the Hart report and of today that would be classed as victims or are victims?
I mean, the short answer to the last question there is absolutely not, right? I wouldn't even attempt to speculate. But the idea of coming before the committee, I mean, again, I don't advocate for any three of the component parts of this, really, but I suppose if I was given advice to the committee, I think we've reached the delicate stage in all of this, I think the independent facilitator process has largely taken its course. So I was acting on behalf of the Northern Ireland Executive. The nitty-gritty negotiations are taking place now with Patrick and his colleagues with the institutions. Ministers have made it very, very clear, look, when the music stops, there has to be complete openness and transparency about where this lands. So there's not going to be some kind of shady deal somewhere that, in a corner. Everything has to, ultimately, be completely on the public record, whatever the outcomes might be. But I'm not sure, I'm saying this very respectfully, Chair, right? I'm not sure what added value the committee might bring at this stage.
Well, with your indulgence, Timothy, when we took evidence from the Northwest survivors, they said that the institutions were put on notice in 2010 that they were going to have to make a contribution. I think we're frustrated on their behalf that 14 years later, only 3 of them have come on board in the last few months. So that's where a lot of this comes from. Sorry, Timothy, go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and agree with your point. It's very valid. You had mentioned about the 73-year period from 1922 to 1995. Can you provide, why was the cut-off 1995, just for my own knowledge?
I don't know the answer to that, do you, Patrick? No? No idea.
That's grand.
I think there was a change.
Closed down. 96, the last one closed, I think. They closed.
Moving on, in our briefing paper, contributions from institutions, there's a line in it where it says, "We're identified by the report as being required to make contributions towards the cost of the redress scheme and specialist support services." Is there a legal duty on them to make contributions?
No, there's not, and apologies if that's in our briefing here, that might be loose word, and it's recommended, should have been recommended by the inquiry. As Paula said earlier, there is no legal requirement, but there's a recommendation under HART. That was attempting to differentiate between the 6 that HART has identified systemic failings and those other ones where systemic failings were not identified.
So if some of the, well, 3 of the 6 have paid money, but if the other 3 turn around and say, "We're not engaging," where do we go from there?
Well, first of all, as I said, the 3 are engaging, and we've been engaging, and some have committed to making payments at the end. To go, if there is a refusal, which at the minute we aren't seeing, if there's a refusal, as Paula said, there is submitting issues to mediation, and then to binding arbitration would be the rule set out by Sir Anthony Hart. We also
There's no legal route to get down that, is there?
No.
Which concerns me. I suppose moving on, so you mentioned, for talk's sake, 100 million in payments, and you have said about the 6 institutions up to 25 million each. So if there's 100 million
Total.
25 million total.
in total, so 100 million payments, how much is this inquiry, and its totality costing? So when you're talking about the 50-50, is it 50-50 purely on what's been paid out, or is it 50-50 in the total cost of the inquiry? So the likes of, the payments towards yourself and the work you're doing, the payments for running this redress scheme, or is it just 50% of the payments to the victim?
For the purposes of the framework, it's solely on the basis of payments. So I'm using the term 100 million to represent the determinations by the Redress Board, and you've heard from the Justice, who's the President at the moment, you've heard evidence from. So I have not included the, if you like, the costs of the infrastructural costs, right through from the inquiry, right through to the cost of the Redress Board, the cost of the Commissioner, the civil service time and effort has been put into this. And that money would run into tens of millions of pounds. Okay, that has not been factored into the framework. The only consideration in the framework is the actual determinations that either have been made or will be made. And I'm suggesting that when the scheme ends, that'll probably be in the ballpark of a £100 million of payments, but does not reflect the costs, what I call the infrastructural cost of all of this.
Comparing that to the Republic of Ireland scheme, did they solely look at the cost of the payments when they were considering the 50-50?
I'm going to say I don't know, okay, because I genuinely don't. I was going to speculate that theirs was based on the payments only, but I wouldn't want to be categoric about that, nor could I be categoric about the Scottish model either. But again, I'm going to speculate that the Scottish scheme did not factor in the cost of the infrastructure. It was based on payments, and indeed they discounted the first 10,000 of each payment. So no scheme is completely comparable. But certainly for the framework purposes, I have not factored in the infrastructural costs of redress, because rightly or wrongly I've taken the view that that has been the primary lead of government, and the government has taken this process forward.
Last week we had the monitoring round, and we had figures brought to us and what was envisaged would come in, and that's the money that counted into the end year. Is it yourself provides the figures of a timeline of when the money's coming and how much to expect?
That would be me as a departmental official. So we would work closely with the finance team to factor that into the submissions on the monitoring round and the decisions on budget, because we have an agreement from DOF that can be used within TEO. So that's something that we would work on to make sure that it's factored in. But obviously the specific details is something that given it's a live, sensitive negotiation, the ministers do not want to release at this stage, but will release when the process is concluded.